All right, Dr. Rhonda, welcome. I hope you had a good day.
Good. How did you? How was your day today?
It was good. Monday, just kind of getting back in the swing of things. With students, we're getting ready for our virtual open house on Wednesday. So this is going to be like interesting to have a virtual parent teacher open house.
Uh,
And so we're going to have to be like really concise, and we're working on what we're going to say and introducing ourselves to the parents. And, right now it's just a matter of making sure parents know how to log in, having interpretation, because we have so many different languages spoken at our school, and it's wonderful. So, we're just, one foot in front of the other. And I think, the name of the game is self-care. We
yeah,
were talking about that earlier, how important it is during this time of COVID, because, we're social beings, right? We're social beings, and we're meant to have interactions. And so it's just really important. I know you were talking about taking
yeah.
some self-care this weekend, and
I needed it.
what did you
Absolutely.
do? What
Um,
did you do?
we're lucky enough to be a part of a little lake community, so we have our RV in a very private spot. So we
Oh,
just
nice.
went and stayed there and just enjoyed being
I've
able
been
to.
watching a lot of episodes of like Tiny House Nation,
Oh,
and fantasizing about getting some property in a tiny house and just being off the grid. Also, like I lived in Alaska. And so there's a bunch of shows on Netflix about, the Alaska Bush people and the last frontier, and just
I
having a
didn't even know it
homestead.
was hard to live in Alaska though. Like,
That was rough.
yeah,
Hmm.
that looks like it's going to be a challenge. Like you have to have the skill set to be like, I'm just gonna do this.
Hmm.
A hard place to live.
Yeah, and I was off the road system. I was in the bush, technically the bush. So the next closest village was a 2-hour plane ride away. Like that was the next closest village.
Yeah, I don't know if that's me. I don't think that I could do that one. I
Yeah,
glamp, not camp. I'll just be honest. I
I tell
don't-
you, it's a life-changing experience when you don't have like roads and sidewalks and stores and a Starbucks, and there's nowhere to go. I mean, like you're like dropped in the middle of the lower Yukon. Yeah.
Animals.
So,
There's lots
but
of
I
animals.
wouldn't trade it for anything. And I learned so much about Alaska Natives, um,
Really?
and
Hey,
Native culture in general. And I grew a lot. I grew a lot. I was put under a test in that situation, but it was great. But anyway, I think I gave this a little bit of time to go live. And so I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, Dr. Rhonda, um, so that we can talk all things special education, homelessness. Um, we talked about foster care, students in the juvenile detention system. And you and I, this is our first time actually having a face to face, because we
right.
via Facebook when I was a candidate for CU Region, and somehow our paths crossed on the internet. And
It was
you
Qua.
messaged.
I'm betting you it was Qua.
Was it Qua? Okay,
Qua.
cool. We love Qua, and if he's watching this, we have so much respect for you. He's a retired principal in DPS, and his story is amazing too. And he is an education leader that has such a heart for all students, and maybe that was the glue for us to meet. But you and I just connected with the work that you're doing, in your story, which we're going to share, is absolutely amazing and inspiring. And I'm excited to introduce you now to my audience and talk a little bit more. So I'm going to let you first tell us your education, and your work history, where you're working now, and then we'll go from there.
Oh goodness, that's a lot of information. So I have my doctorate in education, specifically higher education, teaching and learning. I've got 2 master's degrees, one in communication, sorry, writing, and the other one in education and instruction, curriculum and instruction. and a bachelor's, and also communication. Goodness, this educational pathway kind of started a little backwards. I didn't jump into teaching to teach. I was what they called an at-risk student, and a program called Uplift just kind of jumped into my life and supported me. But it was a very good best friend who knew that I was struggling to read and to write, and I was pretending pretty well throughout high school, but she picked up on it, and she really forced me to read with her and to do math with her after school. She was just she's still an amazing human. She's like my biggest cheerleader, and I thank her tons for everything that she's done for me. But we knew back then that I had a disability in reading, writing, and in math. Like, we knew it. We weren't able to identify exactly what it was because my grandmother would not let me get tested. The school asked her to, and she said no, because the stigma of disabilities was so very, very pervasive that she didn't want me to have that stigma. So she refused to let me get tested. So I was just kind of floating through the educational process, and I kept getting teachers who would say things like, you could never get above a C in my class, no matter what you did. So there went the encouragement to try to do anything different. But I had been a counselor through Uplift eventually, and that required me to come up with lessons, and to learn how to lesson plan to some degree. And I won't say it was like the most effective lesson plan ever, but it was really helping at-risk kids like myself, to be able to teach kids in lower grades and to support like the programming that they had and help them to work towards finding a job. That became a really important skill though when I had my first daughter, my daughter Amir, and I realized when I put a pencil in her hand and tried to have her write, that she just became a different human. So she went from very well-mannered to, aggressive. She threw something at me, and we just had kind of our come to Jesus moment on, I'm going to teach you and you're going to learn, and her, I'm willing to let my mom teach me. And through a couple years of really fighting back and forth with what worked for her, I started going to school full time, going to work full time, and then when I pick her up from school, learn what she learned, and then reteach it at home for her. After working with her for a while, I had other parents just asking me, what are you doing? Because we're seeing a difference in how she responds. And I was just like, this is all I'm doing. This is what I'm doing at home. We're practicing these things. We're working on these things. But they were just like, I don't know if I can do that. And I'm like, you absolutely can, because I'm struggling with it. So let's figure it out. She went from academically behind for 3 grades to on target by 5th grade, to advanced classes by 8th grade. She graduated at 16, went to college, got her bachelor's at 19 in business, and then the next year got an MBA at 20. She got a clinical mental health degree when she was 21, and then she is now 24, about to be 25, and she's working. She just got her master's in clinical psychology and is working on a doctorate in clinical psychology. But I mean, she's a student right now, an adult with dyslexia, auditory processing, severe ADHD, sensory deprivation, chronic asthma, allergies, eczema. She's got some other underlying health issues that she deals with. And we just fought. And she was actually the one who pushed me to get my doctorate. She's like, Mom, you need to be teaching and you need to go to school to teach. And I was like, I don't need to do that. I can keep doing what I'm doing. And she was my bully. She just kept on pushing and saying, you need to do something else. So I went and started working on my doctorate degree. And during that time, my new husband and I had 2 sons. Alex, who has severe ADHD and dyslexia. He was that kid who read from period to capital letter backwards, but phonetically correctly. And then Anthony, who's autistic and gifted, and they're all gifted, just get different in different ways, who just struggled a lot with social, dealing with people, being social, being around other people. So we just had to develop different ways to help all of them learn. Um, Alex is now a US Marine, and Anthony is working in some field where he speaks only acronyms, and I still am going to struggle with exactly what he does. And in the midst of that, we have two really beautiful stepdaughters. I have two beautiful stepdaughters, and they're two very amazing human beings who just have lived that general education life. So we've kind of touched on every single round. And then in the middle of this, once I turned 40, I found out that I had autism. And that was a different swing of learning about myself, but it helped. It helped me to understand how I processed and why it was important to me to really work in this field. So I got my doctorate. I became a teacher through DPS originally. I worked in APS for 4 years. I've stepped out a little bit to Cherry Creek, and now I'm back in APS, working for a program that is a private program that's grouped with a public school. And we work with some of our hardest students who had just some really tough situations in their lifetime that have made it difficult for them to function in regular general education settings. And it's our goal to kind of work ourselves out of a job and get them to a point where they can be back in a general education setting and successful. And if we keep them until they graduate, to transition them into the workforce in whatever way that that fits for their strengths, and get them living their own lives more independently. So it's a kind of a full round.
It's amazing and inspiring to hear your story and to see how you were able to educate yourself to help your own daughter. You know, you don't hear that a lot, even though we have a lot of parents who are champions for their children. They are working in different fields, and so, you know, they need our help to care about their children. We were talking about this. It's really challenging for a general education teacher to work with several students with various needs, right? We are not taught typically how to differentiate with all of the different special needs. And then within each category, it's even more nuanced, right? I
Well,
mean,
that's because we're orphans. So when you're looking at a student with a disability, they're really orphaned. They are probably one of the few people that is like them, and probably the only person like them in that particular academic setting. People may have very similar needs to them, but they're really alone in their environment. You would think, with us being nationally over 1 billion strong, people with what we call invisible disabilities, there's billions of us around the world, but unique to me, there's not one exactly like me. So when you're asking a teacher to have to come in with so many nuanced people, so many different issues going on, that's a scary thing to ask a teacher to climb when we haven't really done the research to equip teachers the way we need to.
this is why your voice is so important, because you were of that generation that was lost.
Yeah.
We often do have parents who, like your grandma, don't want their child to have the stigma of a label of being special education. And so with that, you were not diagnosed. We have a lot of children who are not diagnosed, misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, and they don't get the services that they need. And it took you your entire adult life
Yeah.
to put a name to what you were struggling with. And I'm sure that's got to feel good, because at least now you know. But how much more, I mean, how much easier would it have been if you had that support, that academic support, to build your confidence? Because clearly, because you went through that, you were able to identify your daughter early, build that confidence, and give her the support. And now she's amazing, you know, and self-sufficient, even though she still is able to manage, because it doesn't go away. You mean, you
No,
can't like medicate
right.
on
You
the
don't
things that you are dealing with, right?
exactly.
So what would you say to a general ed teacher, especially one that's kind of young in the profession, and they have a regular classroom, but they have, you know, 4 or 5 students with different IEPs and 504s, and maybe even a mild, moderate, or, you know, intensive student in their class that has them for, you know, a section? What would you say to them?
This is where data is so important. Knowing the student And I know it gets difficult. You're like, well, the student won't test, and the student won't do this, and the student won't do that. But there are several levels of understanding what a student can and doesn't know. You can figure out whether they can speak it, they can read it, they can write it, or they can at least listen to it and catch how they're listening to it, how they're speaking to it. Do you have a kid who is very cognitively aware, but is struggling with being able to read the content? Well, then you have access to accommodations such as video that you can bring in some content for that student. But really, it's all about how you assess the student. And I know that that is what a lot of teachers get really, they're like, well, I don't have the time to assess. It's really hard to find that information. And the kid is not giving me what I need to be able to learn that. But the more you get to know that student, the better prepared you are to be able to support that student in the long run. And the more you actually are going to support some of the behaviors in class that that student may be exhibiting. Because a lot of the behaviors are around lack of access and lack of the ability to be able to make that academic connection, and feeling and knowing that you're different, knowing that you're not doing it in a similar way to your peers. It's offsetting, it's off-putting to the heart. And I can speak to that. When I was in high school, I watched people get things so easily, and they could just write it down one time and it was fine and they got it. But I was on the back end carrying all my books home so I could copy my textbook pretty much cover to cover, so I can try to remember the fine details of what we covered in that chapter. So it was putting in a lot more work to get the same effort. And the more people would try to pull me away from that gen ed setting, the more difficult it became to catch up. So it's very important for teachers to know that, because once we start moving that child out of that setting, that's when it becomes the gaps sometimes will increase. And then teachers are like, why is that getting so big? And it's because they've been removed. And you would be surprised at what 10 minutes of listening to content will do inside the minds of a student who has access difficulties in one way or another. So really, it goes back to data. You got to know your students.
That's a great segue when you talk about the data and we look at the numbers, because I don't know of a district that, doesn't show a disparity, when we break down not only racially, but for special ed, right? Those gaps. It's really important for us to take a look at those and problem solve. But it starts, I think, it starts with an empathetic teacher. Yes. I mean, we have to know that education has changed. This is my 27th year. So think about how much public education or education in general has changed in 27 years. It's a lot. When I started teaching, I was in a school where all the kids looked pretty much the same. They looked like they were at the same level, right? There were a lot of assumptions because I didn't know to look for a lot of differentiations because I was so young and so naive. I just assumed all kids could learn the same thing in the same way.
Right.
But we know more now, and there are stronger laws, right? There are stronger laws. The teacher really needs to know the laws. It is not just the responsibility of the special education teacher to know what the special ed laws are. General ed teachers need to know what the special education laws are and make sure that you are following those accommodations to a T, because our students deserve that. Our students have a right to an education, right? Yeah. And not just any kid education. We want them to have a high quality education. And so that starts with an empathetic, caring teacher that says, this is my calling. I hope it's a calling for everybody and not just a job. That I'm going into this knowing I'm going to have to roll up my sleeves. I'm not going to quit. There are going to be days where I'm frustrated, days where I'm tired, days where I cry, where I planned a beautiful lesson and it flopped. That's okay. And you understand this as your PhD. I have my master's, but I also got my national board certification. And the one thing I learned through national boards is that you're not a national board master teacher every single lesson. A national board master teacher is not a perfect teacher. Right. A master teacher is a reflective teacher. And if you do not reflect every single time that you have a lesson, you're not going to excel and do your students service like they deserve.
And the
So if
failed
there's
lessons are actually the best lessons. If I hadn't
Mhm.
failed at trying to teach my daughter how to write for the first time, I wouldn't have been able to be cued into the fact that she was struggling with something. I'd have thought it was me. I was successful. That little table I bought did the trick. Getting her the right pencil and the right piece of paper and perfectly writing her letters out was as a model for her. Those were the tools that she needed. I had to utterly fail at that and be crushed in my spirit when it didn't work out that way for me to reevaluate that she needed it a different way.
Let's switch into behavior and how it connects, because a lot of times we see in our schools where a child has a special need, but their behavior reflects something negative. And so we tend to discipline inappropriately rather than address a frustration or a learning disability or some other way that's appropriate for that child that they're going through. I mean, what have you noticed in your work that is adding to that frustration or disparity?
I think the issue is a lot of times we put a lot of word heavy language in front of the students without realizing that it's that heavy language or too much information on the page that is what's the first jarring thing for a student that causes them to begin that acting out. They've already been dealing with the stigma their whole lives, most of us, about how we shouldn't accept that we are disabled. I get it as an adult, where people will tell me, don't tell people you have autism. Say you're a person living with autism. Well, it's not a partner of mine. It's how I see the world. It is the way that I function and I work. And I know that people feel like that's a power language, but it's the same as just saying, well, no, don't tell people you're a woman or you're Black or whatever. Those things take that power away from it. I name it, I claim it, it's mine. But sometimes a lot of people in society whisper about disabilities and they whisper about the problem. And kids hear that language. So they're already starting out with that feeling of that realization of that if they're claiming it and they're holding on to it, that there's already something wrong with them. So then they're sitting in the classroom and you put something word heavy in front of them. The bravest thing in their mind to do is I'll just act out and I'll easily get out of it. That's my cue to get out of it, is just to act out. And so that's a hard thing because then teachers are stuck with, okay, so I have this student who's acting out. I have this class of 25 to 30 plus, probably sometimes more than that kid. I don't want the other kids to think this behavior is okay. So what do I do with this student? And the simplest thing is sometimes to just walk over and say, if you give me a moment, I will show you how to do this. Just give me a moment. Just sit here, take your time. I'm not asking anything of you yet. We're going to figure this out. But it's to really get at that level of removing the language and then removing the stigma. If you see behavior as always an attack on you, then it's going to be harder for you to accept that kid and their behavior as just the way that they're presenting because they're struggling through something else academic. And it could be emotional issues that have that kid tied up. But it's all about not taking it personal. This kid isn't really attacking you. They're attacking the situation that they're living in, whether that's perceived or very realistic. And so it's just that deep breath. And it's okay if you discipline a kid and you realize that's probably not the right tactic for next time. The first thing you do when you see them, apologize. I tell my students all the time, I'm willing to apologize. Catch me in messing something up, and I'll be happy to apologize. You're probably going to be the first adult in their lifetime that's ever actually apologized to them. And that will go so far to build that trust. And the more you build that trust, the less likely that student is to act out. And sometimes you'll get a student who'll act out more, and that's because they really do trust you a
Mhm.
lot. and you're the safest person available for them to act out.
I think that's a good point to make right now and highlight that as adults, we're still human. We have our own triggers and traumas and things and stories that we bring in our profession, and we don't always respond appropriately when it comes to discipline, you know, and I think it's really good for us to practice apologizing when we are wrong. I'm not just saying, I'm not sorry for disciplining you. I might not have had the best tone,
Right.
or I might have reacted instead of asking, hey, you know, a question goes a long way. How was your day? Like, what happened to you? Like, talk to me after, like, take a breather. I
Right.
mean, the best thing to do is say, like, take a breather. What do you need right now? Wait till they're calm, wait till you're calm, and come back and have a conversation. I want to say hi to Vanessa and hi to Qua. They're both watching. Yeah, like this, if you guys have a question or you have something you want to say, like, I'm getting a lot better at this whole like live Zoom thing, and so like interacting with people who
I'm
are
not good at it.
but that's so important to have that humility and model to our students how to apologize when we're wrong about a reaction or an overreaction. But
never, if you can discipline one student in a way you would never discipline any other student in your class, that should be a check mark to you that maybe what you're doing is not the right thing. So Molly can't get away with something that Jimmy would do and be in trouble for. So you have to be very consistent and concise. Everybody gets the same thing, because when you roll back into it, everyone's like held to the same standard. And when everyone's held to the same exact standard, that's also going to be one of the things that's necessary to manage those behaviors. And if you would talk to Jimmy about something, you're going to have to talk to Molly about something. But you have to really watch that, because sometimes we have a student whose behavior is ramped up, so to speak. And as soon as they do something, whether it's typical or atypical, we're on that behavior, because we're like, oh, this is going to lead to this. But Molly's watching. And what if Molly does the same thing that Jimmy does, and you just excuse it for Molly? Now, Jimmy now knows in your space, there's no such thing as fair.
Right. I'm going to go back to, I'm getting all fancy with my camera here.
I can see that. You're doing a great job.
So one thing I've learned over time, again, like there's so much wisdom at birthdays. You learn a lot, and you just go, okay, I don't want to continue to beat myself over the head by not seeing immediate changes. Like, you in education have to be in for the long haul. You may have a sixth grader come in and the growth is so small, but then something happens when they start, you know, they're finishing their last semester in eighth grade, and you're like, finally, like, I'm starting to see. Just know that telling a child something once, twice, 3, 10, 20 times, it might be that 21st time,
right,
or that 30th time where it starts to stick. So you can't get frustrated and say this isn't working, because we know with youth, I mean, biologically, their brains, their amygdalas, everything, I mean, their hormones, they're changing. That can impact their maturity level. And so you just have to know that if you're going into education, that it's going to be a labor of love and patience and repetition, expecting that child is going to come in and they might have a good day today, and tomorrow it's just like they went back to the same old behaviors. But it doesn't mean that you stop, or that the work, you know, isn't right that you're doing. You just have to keep doing that.
Exactly.
So you work with high schoolers.
Oh, we're 4th through 12th grade.
So sorry, 4th through 12th grade. Okay.
Eventually we'll be K through 12th grade. So.
Pardon?
Eventually we'll be K through 12th grade.
K through 12. Okay. I want to talk about the older kiddos.
Got it.
Because they're getting ready to go off into the real world. Some of them have criminal records. that you work with. Those are really tough because we're looking for work for them,
Yes.
a future, whether it be college, like traditional college. Some of them, are in a place where they can handle being that independent, and some of them you're struggling to find them a place to be independent. And I'm not sure of exactly of all the programs that are out there, publicly and privately. You're a private,
Yes.
right, organization. So you're juggling how to get funding because you're not a 501c3 and you're not a nonprofit, and there's like all of this legal stuff. But let's just go back to, we talked about kiddos that are in the foster care system. Okay, let's say like right now they go to college to see you, and COVID hits, and they've graduated out of the system, so they don't really technically have a home.
Right.
They're homeless. They have no place to go. They have no support for holidays and emergencies like this. Or you have students who are struggling to find even money to pay for their education when they've been through the system, but they don't have the income or just enough, or something. Like there's all of these issues with financing college and things like that. Talk to me about some of the hurdles that you have to go through and some of the needs that you have.
So when we're looking at students in the high school who are in this population, um, the good news for some of them is that we have what we call transition programming. So that's where we'll roll them into a program that is, graduate through 21, if they're not 21 already, that helps them to try to transition into the real world. Let's say we have those students who are more mild moderate. Those are the students who are cognitively aware, just struggling, haven't been in different systems back and forth. Then it becomes a little bit more difficult to find programs that are doing jobs programs. So we're trying to teach them how to fill out resumes. They're credit short, lots of credit short. So we have students who are really struggling and they're going to be a senior, but they don't have enough credits to fill a freshman year. So then we have to help those students figure out how they're going to find a job. A lot of jobs require a high school diploma or a GED, but maybe the student is struggling to be able to test to pass the GED. So finding a career or a career path that's going to help them to be able to move into society in a way that's sustainable. I think that some people feel like, well, I can get you a job as a checker, which is a great start for a student who's transitioning. You know what I mean? Like that's a great place for somebody to start when they're really struggling with cognitive issues. But say you probably have to support a family. So I'm going to step out of my little realm and into a more traditional setting. Say you're a mild, moderate student, but for some reason you've gotten pregnant along the way, and now you have a family to support. So now for you, that would be multiple jobs that you'd have to transition into without a high school diploma, or hoping to eventually get your high school diploma to be able to get into that job. So we're trying to find groups that are geared towards how do I support kids who are in these types of settings to be able to put the past behind them, move into a position that will help them build a life for themselves. And we're really just a brand new group. So we're just learning about that. We also have to deal with things like confidentiality of our students. So we have to be very cognizant and aware that anyone that we work with, we have to make sure that our parents are okay with us making that content. So it's a contact. We're in a really strange position because of the nature of our program. We're all special ed. We do teach gen ed as well. Our teachers are dually trained, which I love, but it's really kind of a catch-22, And so, yeah, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this, but that's like the heart of it, is that we're really trying to make sure they have resources, like good, strong mentors. It's not just good enough to go to school and have a good teacher. but how do we build really strong mentors in the community where our kids can have somebody to trust and rely upon as they're moving out, so that that student doesn't get missed. Oftentimes we'll have a very transient population here for a couple months and then they're gone. If there was a mentor that these students could connect with outside of us, then maybe they would tell that person where they're going. And maybe there's a way to keep that connection moving so that that student has somebody who catches them.
Mhm.
I'm hoping that I'm touching on all the alls, but
Yeah.
it's a lot of alls.
I want to say hi to a few people who just jumped on. David, William, Ashley, just amazing people in the community. Thanks for jumping on. And Vanessa is engaging. Thanks for, do you know Vanessa? Vanessa Warren DeMott? She was talking about how she had students flourishing after a lot of hard work and dedication. I think that's key. And I think it's a good reminder when we see adults in the community who are struggling or who, you know, are special needs. I mean, I think it's easy to say, oh, you know, if I go to Goodwill, I know that a lot of them are people who have transitioned, right? But
Right.
they're everywhere in all types of jobs. And if you're an employer that has a job that you can hire someone and train them with a skill, I hope that you get a hold of Dr. Rhonda here. What's a good contact for you?
Oh goodness, here, let me give you the email. It's it'll be rhonda.richmond@tracelerconsulting.com. And I'll write that out. It's
In
a
the chat,
long
yeah,
email. Yeah,
because you never know who's watching this, because we'll have it saved, who might have a heart and a need for someone to work, and they can reach out to you and identify what the skills are, different skills that people have. But it's really important that we take care of each other, because, you know, I don't have a problem talking about my faith, because my Bible says that we are to take care of the widow and the orphan. And for a lot of these children, you described, you know, a lot of these children as orphans, even if they're technically not, they feel like they are, or they operate like they are alone. And it's important for us to take care of each other, especially now. You know, I just see so much in our world, and we need more humanitarians and people who will be patient and caring and help. But especially going back to these fourth graders, let's go back to the fourth graders now, because we talked about the older children. We know that third grade is when students start to get tested, and that's where we start to see a lot of the disparities in education, where we can turn children off to education where maybe they weren't,
yeah,
you know, physically special education, but they ended up being in special education because they just didn't get the supports that they needed, and all of that. And so when you're working with fourth graders,
yeah.
what are you seeing?
Oh goodness. Sometimes it's a lot more behavior driven for students that are younger because they can't always express their needs. So working on helping them to build some vocabulary and language, and that even goes to some of our kinders. Like they're just struggling to be able to communicate. A lot of speech and language issues for that group. Um, but as they do, some of the behaviors will sometimes feel a little more difficult to control than our older populations, and that's because, again, um, when you don't know how to respond, you scream. Every baby does it. If any parent who's had a child knows that as soon as the baby doesn't get what it wants, it just starts yelling its head off. Male or female, whatever they're dealing with, diaper change, food, the yelling starts, and sometimes the hitting starts, and sometimes the aggression starts because they can't express it. So we're seeing a lot of students who are dealing with that sort of hostility, it feels like, I guess, if you're the teacher in there, because it can be really in your face. And parents are struggling to figure out how do I help and support my child at home, because I get tired. I'm working full time, or I've got other kids, I've got other stuff to do. So a kid will come in and sometimes they don't have the skill set they need to address their emotional situation, which impacts their academic situation. But once you're able to help them to start to regulate, name some things like this is anger that I'm feeling. This is frustration that I'm feeling. I'm actually happy at the moment. And it's the only way I know how to express that I'm filled with joy, because they can sometimes read the same. You have a kid and they're just really excited and it looks like they're really upset, and they're actually not. So that's where data goes back to the conversation. But really seeing a lot of kids with that need towards, building a foundation of, skill set in order to express where they're struggling. And so when we have really good teachers who are trained and realizing how to catch kids when we see that they're starting to make those slips, they're less likely to end up with me. But when they end up with me, that what we're seeing is the struggle to really control the body, because the mind is not where it needs to be in terms of being able to access the academics.
So one of the things we've been working a lot on, at least I can only talk about my school and in DPS, the MTSS process. We're working really hard to build stronger relationships with parents, instead of just assuming and having the only interaction with the child, but picking up the phone or doing a home visit and finding out what's going on at home and what the parents are seeing and how to partner with the parents. Now, I know there's a specific way to talk to parents. You have some parents who are very hungry to work with the school. And then we have parents like your grandma who are like, I don't want my child to have the services. So you have like this big gamut. And it's heartbreaking when you're a teacher and you see that a child needs services, but you're not allowed to technically give them services. It doesn't mean that you can't
Right.
incorporate best practices with the child. I mean, you can still do your part, but is there advice that you would give to a teacher in how to talk to a parent to build a relationship, and things that you should say or should not say to a parent?
Just remember that parents are dealing with privacy issues too. And it's not that for some parents that they don't want to support their kids' academics. It's they don't want the intrusion into their space. It's their private space. And I'm a lot that way. And I'll work with a school on their own property. But if you were to say to me, hey, I'm coming to your home, we'd have an issue, because this is my private space. I come here to relax. I come here to let it all go. And I don't want to clean up for this person or that person. So remembering that people are human and it's not about not wanting to support their child. It's also about wanting to be able to have a private space for them to be in, and that's their house and that's their home. So it's almost easier to invite them in after COVID, or even during, for breakfast. We're going to do lunch. Maybe we're going to do dinner. We want to have you come out so that they can come in and participate that way. If you get into a point where you're starting to feel like the parent feels like you're intruding, you probably are. So back up and rethink, and think about it as your most private individual who really just doesn't want anybody in that space. Always assume the best intent possible when you're dealing with a parent. Yes, you may see a parent who's struggling. You may see a parent who's having a hard time. And sometimes we equate that with neglect, where it's the parent doing the best that they can. So with parents having had some really unfortunate situations with people presuming that they're not providing for their child's needs in any way, they've had intrusion in ways we can't naturally always understand because we haven't been in their shoes. So it's about stopping and realizing that there's probably something else going on, not nefarious, just security wise. People like
And no parent wants to hear from anybody if it's negative all the time, right? So you want to always find something positive to say about their child, and start with what we call glows and grows, right? We have glows, like something you can always think of something positive to say about a child. Don't just call a parent if there's something wrong happening or their child is misbehaving, because that's not the way that you build a relationship. You always want your interactions at first to be positive. And I want to say big shout out to Kevin, Michael, Paul just jumped on. We've got a lot of people jumping on. Tom just jumped on. Hello, giving shout outs to everybody. So that's a low hanging fruit. Just, hi, I just want to introduce myself. I'm your child's teacher. I'm so excited to work with your child. Is there anything that you want me to know that's important to you? Because I'd love to partner with you this year. And here's my contact information. And now, especially with COVID, and most of us are doing some form of remote, it's really easy to send an email or a text or a phone call and say, what's the best way for me to communicate with you?
Yes. And don't make your first communication the home visit. Please don't.
And ask. And it's, what I used to do so many home visits, and I would always partner with another teacher, and this teacher would always make brownies. And of course the kids and the parents just love brownies. I would recommend, if you're up to that challenge, not to go empty handed, to someone's house. But take them some goodies, some cookies or brownies. And you know what? These parents are amazing. I can't tell you how many times when people knew we were coming and they would have dinner ready for us, like a home cooked meal. It's just the relationship and the warmth. If you start out a school year with that, having been invited to someone's home, that relationship is just going to be so smooth going forth.
They're more likely to trust you with their kid too. So that when the kid is struggling, they'll be like, hey, we really like this person. Why would you do something like this in this person's class? The parent will more have your back because you built the relationship with the parent.
Mm-hmm. And I want to say hi to Rick, who just jumped on. That trust, that's a big word. Okay, because I want to highlight that word, the trust. I know when I have built a trusting relationship with my son's teachers, now we are friends, right? Because I can be more open. I can say, hey, tell me more about how I can support my child in your class. Right? Is there something that needs to be done? How are they doing? So that, because, a lot of times parents are afraid to tell parents anything negative.
Right.
And that's a bad thing too, to not be honest about behaviors that you're seeing in class.
Right.
And sometimes parents can be teachers can be intimidated if their child's parent is an educator as well, right? So it's like, yes. So I think on our part, when you're a parent and you're an educator, when you're dealing with your child's teachers, to also build an open relationship and say, listen, I'm not going to make any assumptions, about what's going on, and feel free to be really honest about what you need.
Right.
We know, I'm sorry, I'm just going to say this and I'm going to let you talk. We know children behave differently at school than they are when they're in front of their parents.
They do. Mine included. They do. I mean, there's one thing I would love to see more teachers do, and that's host a training session for parents, not just how to get online. Do a blurb on how to do the math you're doing, how to speak to the literacy that you're putting in front of the child. Because we send the homework home or we ask parents to work with kids online, we have not equipped some parents to be able to do that. And it's optional. Here, I'm making a video to let you know this is the math we're doing. You can stop it, you can fast forward it, you can go slow, but I'm going to go step by step on what I want your child to be able to know for this lesson. That went a long way with working with some parents when we started going remote. When I went remote and I put out those training videos, parents were like, oh, now I know what my kid needs to do. Now I know, this makes more sense to me, because I didn't understand it before. Doing whatever you can to support parents as if they may not know how to support their student at home. Mm-hmm. Not the assumption that they can't, but as if they're not sure. Because I know my son would come home with math sometimes and I'm like, I can't. And if it's not on Khan Academy somewhere, it's not going to happen. And the teacher was like, well, you should be able to do this. You're a woman with education. And I'd have to re-explain, yes, I am, but I also have a significant disability in this area. And without you modeling what needs to happen, when we go on to this video that Khan Academy has, and I'm just throwing them out there because it's the one I can think of, they're not doing the same problems or similar problems to what you have my child doing. And it's confusing me and it's confusing my child. So I'm not sure what to do. But if the teacher does it informationally and just has it out there, then the parent can go out with the child and say, look, this is your teacher doing it. Let's do this together and figure this out together. And then that helps bond the parent, bond the teacher to the family, and bond the child to the parent at home.
That's amazing and great reminder for us. And real quick, I want to say hi to Patricia and Sarmad who jumped on our live. We need to remember that sometimes parents are intimidated by the school. They may not have had good experiences themselves in school or with teachers or administrators. And so they may avoid reaching out. And so we want to encourage parents to feel empowered. You have every right to contact your child's teachers, make appointments to be in the classroom with your child, because especially our highest needs parents, they are working 24/7, taking care of their children depending on how severe the need is. It is draining and exhausting. And I want to acknowledge our parents who have children with special needs who are on 504s and IEPs, because they are constantly having to monitor their progress. And I know a lot of parents are frustrated and they said, my child is supposed to be on a 504 or an IEP and their plan is not being followed. And I've already communicated with the school over and over and over again. And that can create such a stressful and adversarial relationship between the parent and the school. And then that goes to the child, right? And so we want to minimize the amount of frustration that a parent feels when they're trying to advocate for their child and maybe they're not getting answers at the school, or they're having to start over every year with a new group of teachers. So I think on our part as educators, we need to do our best to equip our teachers to take these plans seriously and take these accommodations seriously for these children, and to communicate with parents consistently. And I want to ask parents to, every couple of weeks, send a mass email out to all your kids' teachers and say, hey, I'm just doing a check-in. How is my child doing? It's okay, because honestly, we do have a lot of students that we are working with, and it's just human nature that with all of the demands on our teaching, that we mess up. We are not perfect. It's not okay. But to have that really gentle prod to say, hey, I'm checking in. And then we know that this child's parents are holding us accountable. Don't be afraid to hold teachers in the school accountable for doing our job. There's no reason that a teacher should be offended or upset when a parent is contacting the school saying, I'm just checking in, or this is what I expect. You have every right as a parent to expect that your child is getting the services that they need. So we are down to the last 5 minutes, Doctor. I want to say this because if you didn't see this at the beginning, Dr. Rhonda has autism, and she is not shy to talk about that, because I think that's the power in her story. Having struggled through school with her own disabilities and having a PhD and 2 master's degrees, you are a success story. You did not quit and you pushed yourself, and your testimony with your children.
You're cutting me up, and that's tough because I did not do this alone. I had so many people helping me, and I could not have done it alone. People think I had the tenacity. I really struggled not to give up. That's a real thing. You have to build a tribe, and mine's just randomly started. I needed it, but it did. There were random moments where tribe members came out of nowhere and were like, this is not going to look this way for you. You're going to fix this. So you're saying really kind words, but I don't know that I deserve them all.
Well, Well, and that's just a testament of the leader that you are. And, you know, and I also want to add, like, you're not only a mom, but you're a stepmom who has embraced your stepdaughters and loved them just like they're your own, and making sure that they're getting the support you're using and leveraging everything that you have in order to make sure your husband's children are successful as well. And so you get the whole blended family thing. You are like a 360, like the real deal. And that doesn't mean we all have to have that resume, but we can all be tenacious, right? And have grit and be resourceful in finding the answers. And so before we go, I want to give you the last word. I want you to give your email, your website, and any closing comments.
Well, I just want to tell all parents, they can do this. If your child has been diagnosed or has not been diagnosed, you are the biggest and best resource for them on the planet. And it's not as hard to do as you think, but you've got this. It's not outside of your realm of capability to be able to do. I can be reached at Rhonda.Richmond, that's RHONDA.RICHMOND, at Treserv Consulting, that's TRESERV Consulting, all one word, .com. And you can find me on Facebook, and you can find me at Art by Rhonda Richmond, Dr. Rhonda Richmond. I keep forgetting that that's actually in that title. And you can reach me through various means that way too. So Facebook, I'm there. LinkedIn, I'm there. So come find me if you need support.
Yay, and thank you for everybody who's watching. I was so inspired by you, Doctor, so inspired. And thank you, because as we're starting this new school year with everything going on, I am going to be a lot more diligent. So thank you. And hi, Beverly, for jumping on, but we're about to jump off, and hope you have a great week and a great school year. And one more thing, if anybody knows an employer, please connect with Rhonda, because she has young people who are graduating from high school who are going to be looking for work or internships. And we just need people who are caring and have the ability in the community to help out these young people so they can have a bright future as well.
Awesome. Thank
So,
you so much. Thank you,
right.
everybody, for joining.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.